innocent until proven guilty. In New Jersey, with regard to gun ownership, firearms ownership, you're guilty, and you have to figure out how to prove yourself innocent. Right? You can be involved in a situation where there is absolutely no criminal intent whatsoever. You just possess your firearm, and you can find yourself in prison for 7 years, as noted, happened to Brian Aiken way back a couple of years ago. And the only way that he's not in prison today is that we, along with the rest of the firearms owning community and liberty-minded people, were able to convince Governor Christie that we needed a sentence. But that kind of thing, and I don't know, is there anyone that's not familiar with the Brian Aiken story? Okay, everybody's pretty. Okay. That's the kind of thing that can happen. Now, right now, we have a very similar piece of legislation that we're fighting very hard against. It was introduced by Assemblywoman Linda Stender in District 22, which is Union, Somerset, and Middlesex County area. Under the guise of introducing a piece of legislation that on the face of it sounds perfectly reasonable, her quote, and myself and Scott Bach and some of the other New Jersey Second Amendment leaders, Bob Biden, Greg Deere, and so forth, testified in front of the, guys, could you keep it down a little bit, please? We testified in front of the Law and Public Safety Committee in the Assembly, and the problem with the bill is that its stated purpose is upgrades the penalty of unlawful possession of a firearm on school grounds. And you would say, well, that sounds perfectly reasonable. We don't want firearms on school grounds and unlawful possession. Of course, it's, so she wants to upgrade the penalty from a third-degree crime to a second-degree crime. And as I said, on the face of it, it sounds perfectly reasonable, except it's already a second-degree crime to be in unlawful possession of a firearm, or criminal possession of a firearm, anywhere. Whether you're on school grounds or off school grounds, doesn't matter. All right? That is already a second-degree felony. What this particular statute was intended to deal with is those situations where there was no criminal intent. So, for instance, someone is found to be on school property, their firearm is unloaded, it's locked in the trunk of your car, being transported the way that you would normally transport a firearm. And no, there's no crime being committed and there's no evidence of criminal intent. In that case, the judge would have discretion to decide whether or not this is a criminal case deserving 7 to 10 year prison term. So, for example, I use the example, a mom is at the firing range practicing, learning how to defend her family should that situation ever arise. And she's doing what any American citizen should be allowed to do, take her lawfully and legally owned firearm. She's already gone through the firearms, getting the firearms identification card, which involves fingerprinting and criminal background check and mental health check and so forth and so on. She's gone through all of that, so she lawfully, legally owns this firearm. She transports it properly to the range. She is practicing, gets a call on herself in the school saying, your child is ill. She's got 103 fever and she's vomiting. We need you to come and deal with your child. So she jumps, she unloads her weapon, locks it in the trunk of the car, and proceeds to go to the school. Under current law, that's not a problem, really, because say, for sake of argument, she gets onto the school property, she opens the trunk to put the kid's backpack in, and the police officer happens to see that there's a firearm case, a gun case. He may arrest her. It's possible. But the judge, because it's a third-degree offense, the judge has the discretion to just throw it out, to give her a slap on the hand, a small fine. It's not necessarily a felony offense. The problem with raising the penalty, right, in this same case, from a third-degree to a second-degree felony is the Graves Act engages. Now, in New Jersey, the Graves Act says any crime involving the possession of a firearm is mandatory prison time. Okay, 7 to 10 years presumptive 7, minimum 5, 3 years, no parole. So in this same instance, this mom who went to take care of her child, if she had, for whatever reason, been arrested for being in possession of a firearm, she would mandatorily have to go to prison. She would mandatorily have to be, assuming that she was convicted, the judge would have to sentence her to a mandatory prison sentence of at least 5 years. So this is the kind of situation that, this is the kind of situation, was anybody really having trouble here?
No, you're fine.
This is the kind of situation that the people, the legislators, who do not think in terms of what their bills actually, what problems their bills actually create, but they are just trying to introduce legislation either because it sounds good, it makes people feel good, it gets their name in the paper, it could be any variety of reasons, but as our representatives, okay, of all the people, because she doesn't just represent the people in her district when she introduces a bill that goes into law, it affects everybody in New Jersey. She represents all the constituents, and she has to be aware of the consequences of her legislation. But we have a lot of legislators that do not bother considering the consequences. So those are the kinds of things that we keep an eye out for. Also, on a more personal level, all these problems that people have reported to us over the years that we've been in existence. By the way, we just celebrated our 2nd anniversary. So we started in July of 2010, and we just, this will be our end of our 2nd year. So we're going into our 3rd. But in that period of time, we have gotten so many reports from people saying, I went to my police department, why do I have to get a notarized letter from my adult child saying it's okay with them that I can purchase a firearm? Or why do I have to take this quiz? I thought I read online that the only thing I need to do is fill out a criminal background check and a mental health check form and get fingerprinted, and that's it. But, when I go, no, they said, no, you have to fill this out, we want to know where you worked for the last 10 years, we want to know where you lived for the last 10 years, and so many different requirements, and each town was doing something different. So we looked into that. I won't go into all the details, but we looked into that, and we found out that they were indeed breaking the law. Now, we can't break the law, right? Because if we break the law, we wind up in jail. So we retained an attorney, and we looked into this, and we have found, at first we expected a great deal of pushback from the towns. But what we found was, in many cases, we get a lot of cooperation from the towns once we presented them the fact that what they're doing is illegal. In many cases, they really didn't know it. What happened was, the officer so-and-so or lieutenant so-and-so comes in, takes over from the guy before him. That's the way they were doing it for 30 years. That's how they told them how to do it. These are the forms you used. Who introduced it? Well, I don't know, a police chief, 30 years ago. So they were just doing what they thought they were supposed to be doing. When we presented them, in a couple of cases we got some pushback, but in most cases the township attorney said, you know what, thank you for bringing this to our attention, we didn't realize it, and they immediately eliminated the forms. Now we're up to about 10, 12 towns now. That we were going, initially we were going after them one at a time, but that's too slow. So now we're going out after them a county at a time. And I think pretty soon we're just going to blanket the state. But you're going to find that within another, I would say, by the end of the year, next year, there will be no additional forms in the state of New Jersey for firearms or for I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to turn the mic over to my legal legislative committee chairman, who's going to tell you about, now that we're well into Operation Established Compliance, which is the name of the campaign that I just talked to you about. We call that Operation Established Compliance because we're trying to get all the towns to comply with the law. And the next step, of course, is, as everybody knows, there are a lot of towns that don't process these within the 30 days. Now, can I promise you that we're going to get every town to process the purchase permits and ID cards in 30 days. No, I can't. But we certainly are not going to allow people, towns to do it, to wait 6 months, a year. I mean, we've heard some horrendous stories. So we're going to try to establish adherence to the 30-day ruling. There's some difficulties with that because of past legislation, past judicial twisting of the law, but I think that we can make a lot of progress. So I'm going to let Bob Barish tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. I also want you to know that we are becoming more and more politically active. We're meeting with, tomorrow we have a meeting with United States senatorial candidate Joe Carrillos. We're going to meet with him. We know he has not shown a very good record with regard to the Second Amendment or the right to keep and bear arms. As a matter of fact, the NRA I think gave him a C. I'm not sure.
I thought it was a D. C minus.
Was it? Was C minus? Okay. And the truth of the matter is, again, in a lot of these cases, it's a lack of education or the lack of understanding of exactly what it is, who we are, as an example, the most responsible people on the planet. And if people understood that, they would not be, causing as much difficulty as they do for us, and trying to keep us from being able to exercise the right. We have a right. There's no question, by the way, if anybody ever says, well, here in New Jersey, we don't have the right to keep and bear arms, that is not true. We have the right to keep and bear arms. What we've done, what the problem that we have to overcome is the authorities in New Jersey throw obstacles in our way to prevent us from exercising that right. We still have the right. So we need to keep that mindset in mind, because that's very important. We are operating from a position of strength because we are right. So keep that in mind as we move forward, because that's going to give you a lot of fortitude and a lot of strength to take us through this battle, because we still have a battle. But just to wrap it up real quick, we have a meeting scheduled with Joe. We're going to talk to him and see if we can come to an understanding. If not, well, Joe, you don't get our help. If we can come to an understanding and you make a commitment, I don't want any glad handing, I don't want any vague promises, yeah, I support the Second Amendment, because everybody says that. The truth of the matter is, do you support the right to carry? Would you ratify this UN treaty that's being bandied out? Because if you will, then you're not our candidate. Would you support national reciprocity? There's a lot of specific issues that we want to discuss. If I come out of that meeting, I'm nobody, okay? I'm just a guy. But what I'm saying is, we come out of that meeting, and other two-way leaders come out of meetings, because there are other leaders that are meeting with them as well, come out with the feeling that it's not our guy. Well, then we sit this one out. A lot of people say, well, then Dennis gets in. Well, I don't know whether it really makes that much difference. So, and maybe it'll teach somebody a lesson if that is the case. But I'm going with a very positive attitude that that's not the case, and that we'll have a very good understanding at this meeting. Also, I want you to know that we're working very closely with some of the Republicans. Not that we do not take a stand. We're not a partisan organization. We don't just support conservatives or Republicans or Democrats or whatever. As a matter of fact, we were the first ones to have a bipartisan, this is over a year ago, we had the first bipartisan dialogue on the right to keep and bear arms, where we invited Senator Michael Dougherty, Republican, and Senator Jeff Van Drew, Democrat, to sit down together and discuss this. So we certainly, we're not looking to take sides on this. However, we've been invited by the Republicans to work with them to establish the Republican caucus to deal with Second Amendment issues. So this is a good step to see that this is a member of the Law and Public Safety Committee, a Republican member of the Law and Public Safety Committee, who has asked us to get involved with this. So that's a very positive move, in my positive indication, in my opinion. Many more things. We have, just so you know, we have Allison McCose coming next month. That meeting will be in Belleville. And for those of you who don't know, we try to rotate these meetings. We have a meeting in Winslow, then we have a meeting in Toms River, and then we have a meeting up in Belleville. We're trying to reach as many people in the state as possible, because its numbers is what's going to make the difference. Okay, the more members we have, and I encourage you, please, if you're here and what I'm saying to you makes sense, please fill out an application before you leave. Join tonight. We need you. We need your membership. We need the resources. It's $35. We don't ask a lot. It's $35 a year. If you can donate more than that, that's great, but that's all we require, and it helps to fund the operations like Operation Establish Compliance and some of the other campaigns that we run, so it's very important. And that, I think on that note, I'm going to, because there's so much more we could say, and if you have a few minutes, if you don't have to run right out after the meeting, and there's a consensus that you want to talk about this a little bit more, I'll be happy to go into much more detail about some of the plans that we have. But I want to allow some time now for, I'm going to introduce to you Mr. Robert Barish. He's the Legal Legislative Committee Chairman, and he's going to have some things to say to you that I think will be of interest to you. So thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so there's a lot of new people here, and Frank asked who's new, who's been here before. Frank mentioned Operation Establish Compliance. Who does not know what Operation Establish Compliance is, other than what Frank just mentioned? Handful? Okay. So, I'll give a short version, and you can talk with me afterwards. I'll explain in more detail if I need to. And Frank mentioned some of it, but essentially, Operation Establish Compliance is the New Jersey Second Amendment Society effort to get police departments and New Jersey State Police Barracks to follow the law. Okay, it's not to change the law, right? It's to follow the law. And there are other efforts to change the law, but this one is to follow. And as you know, a lot of them do not. So, Operation Establish Compliance began after we collected all this data. Phase 1 was a lawsuit that is still going on. Right now we're suing the New Jersey State Police for access to their guide for applications for permitting processes. They have a guide that they don't show to anybody other than the municipal police departments. Now this is a problem because you have the statutes, and then you have the administrative code, and everybody's supposed to follow the administrative code. That's supposed to be the instructions on how you enforce the statutes when doing processing these permits. But they have this guide that goes beyond what the administrative code says. Otherwise, they wouldn't need it. If it only said what was in the administrative code, they wouldn't need it. So, what's in it? We've seen a version that's about 10 or 12 years old. But what's in it now? What's in it now? So we asked them for it. We asked very nicely, and they told us no. So then we submitted a combination OPA request and common law right of access request, and they said no. So then we got an attorney and filed a lawsuit. Now, what are they hiding? What are they hiding? There might be nothing in it, but what are they hiding? Who knows? But at the very end, and we started piecing this together at the beginning and started seeing how this could play out in the courtroom. And something happened that we were hoping would happen. When we were in the courtroom, and some of it is language in briefs, some of it is in a certification by some people from the state police. But in the courtroom, the Deputy Attorney General, who was handling the case for the state, he committed to a position. He said, you don't need to see the guide because of 2C58-3F. It says, no conditions or requirements may be added to the form or content of the application other than those specifically set forth in the chapter. And that statement, this is what they're saying, that statement is definitive and leaves no room for exceptions. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you. We could lose the case now. We got what we want. Really. Because now we take that language, and whenever there's a town that is violating the law, first we send them a nice letter. Hey, you're violating the law. A lot of times they just say, I'm sorry, you're right, we looked at it, forms are gone. Sometimes they try to hold their ground. And we can come back to them with, when they say, no, we can do whatever we want because it's part of the investigation, or whatever excuse they come up with, we say, no, the Attorney General's position is, here it is, here's our court case, here's a certification from Lieutenant Darrell Williams, here's your position is different, get rid of the forms. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that, and we're holding back on some of what we're doing because we don't want someone to try it and without doing all the preparatory steps first. But essentially, we have provided an incentive for them to agree with us, and so far we've gone after 9 towns. 9 towns have dropped their forms, some in a nice way and have cooperated, and some dropped them reluctantly, but realized that they had to. So that's how the first phase, the lawsuit, has tied into the second phase, going after the additional requirements. And now we're going into the third phase. So who here has applied for an FID card or a pistol purchase permit and it's taken longer than 30 days? Okay. Longer than 60 days. Keep your hands up if longer than 60 days. Longer than 90 days. Wow. Okay. Longer than 6 months. Anyone longer than 6 months? Okay. Just the name change. Longer than 6 months. Okay. So this is what we're going after next. Now, some people out there know of a case called Adler v. Levant. And Adler v. Levant kind of gutted the 30-day clause. And some people are of the opinion that you can't challenge the 30-day if they're going past 30 days because of Adler v. Levant. It's not entirely true. There's a little bit of truth in there, but it's not entirely true. There are ways to go after people that abuse this process. See, there's a difference between a detective who is legitimately waiting on something to be returned to him, like maybe one of your references didn't mail their form back. And I'm not saying I agree with that process, but that's the law. There's a difference between that and a detective that leaves the application in his inbox for 2 months without touching it. Okay, there's a difference. And that can be tracked. When did you turn it in? What date did you turn it in? What date, see, if it ever gets in front of the right person, what date did you submit for the check from the State Bureau of Investigation? What date did you get it back? What dates did the reference forms come back? See, all of these are dates that you can look at, and maybe we're not allowed to see them, but if it's ever in front of a judge, the judge can say, I want to see it in my chambers, I want to see it in camera. Okay? So we can ask that question. We can say, why did it take 6 months? And in New Jersey, like anywhere else, if you're a government official, you have a responsibility to do those tasks that are required by law for you to do. And if you don't do them, then there's some type of negligence involved. And so, rather than try and relitigate Adler v. Levant, we have an opening where we can go after the people that are abusing this, that are abusing it. Not the ones that are taking 6 weeks, but the ones that are 6 months or longer. And once we are able to hold one person accountable for taking too long, That's all it takes. Everyone else will notice and will say, wow, that guy got in trouble. He took 6 months and he got in trouble. Well, when do you not get in trouble? 4 months? 3 months? 2 months? When do you not get in trouble? Well, the solution is get it done in under 30 days and you know you won't be in trouble. So it is possible to gut ad levab by taking the right approach. And not going after the honest guys, going after the ones that are abusing the system, not completing the forms on time, leaving them sitting there, being negligent about their responsibilities. That's what we're looking at. So if anyone here if it has taken more than 6 months to get something done, and you don't have a chance to talk to me after the meeting, please email legislation@nj2as.com and send me your contact information and a brief description of your town and county, and we'll talk about it. And maybe your town's the right one to go after, maybe it's not. But this is the start of phase 3 of Operation Establish Compliance. And phase 2 is widely successful. I mean, the batting 1,000, they cannot put up a defense against the approach we're using in phase 2, and it's going to be very difficult for them to put up a defense against the approach that I outlined. I didn't go through all the details, but the approach that I outlined for phase 3. So anyone in here, please email me. If you know someone, email me. We're going to go through we're going to look at as many as we can and pick the ones that make sense, that give us the best chances for success. We may not have to file a lawsuit. It might not be a lawsuit. We might be able to hold them accountable by some administrative ways. So if you don't want to be a plaintiff, that's okay. It might not go in that direction. So please contact me if you're in that situation or you know someone that's in that situation. Legislation@nj2as.com.
Okay, and as I mentioned before, if you can, please stay after Dennis's presentation because we just have a few other things that we need to speak to you about, and I'm going to have Alexander speak to you then. At this point, I think I'm going to introduce to you somebody that most of you already know, Mr. Dennis Malloy of the popular Dennis and Judy Show. You heard me mention Brian Aiken earlier, and going back to that time when Brian was going through this really horrific experience of being tossed into prison for 7 years for not committing any crime, for no criminal intent whatsoever, just for transporting his legally owned firearms from one state to another being this. So that, I guess that's a crime in and of itself. Making the mistake of moving back here, but there were reasons, and most of you know the story. At that time, very few people took up Brian's story and helped him. Dennis Malloy was one of the few that did, and he jumped right in and really took up Brian's case, broadcast it on the radio. We talked with Dennis; he was all ready to help us with a rally that we were going to have, except that it just never came off. And then eventually, because of some of the things that Dennis did, some of the things that the 2A leaders, including ourselves, did, Brian had his sentence commuted by Governor Christie, and he has since, by the way, I don't know, most of you may know this, Brian has since had 2 of the 3 charges appealed. He's overturned them on appeal. There's one more that really doesn't make any sense at all. I'm not going to go into that with you right now because at this point I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Dennis Malloy.
Thank you for inviting me here tonight. It's my honor. It's really hot today. I just got a news alert. Governor Christie lost his temper again. Up on the seaside boardwalk, it seems the compressor at Rita's Italian Ice broke down. And they're freaking. Well, as Frank mentioned, the reason I got involved with the society is because of the Brian Aiken case. But before I get to talk about that, and I never really like to get too involved in causes and get too close to politicians or appeal to them personally, because most of them repulse me. But I'll tell you a quick story that I was, and it all ties together. It may seem a little off the path, but it ties together. Played golf with a friend of mine, invited me to play golf. I hadn't played golf in like 2 years. Any golfers here? Guns and golf, that's an interesting mix. I should carry one of those in my bag for myself. So I played golf, took us to a nice restaurant afterwards. I was having dinner, and nice Italian restaurant, and the waiter mentioned that he had just got married, showing his ring. The waiter was gay. So people asked him questions. So, did you go out of state? Did you go to Massachusetts? Where did you get married? I said, no, I took a cruise. The two of us said something to each other. Ship's captain raised a glass, toasted us both, and that was it. It was our ceremony. We made a vow to each other, and we exchanged rings, and that's it. So I said, well, you don't want to make it legal? We can get married? He said, you kidding me? I'm 2 years away from retirement. I'm not giving away my pension. I'm not giving half of my pension away. I thought to myself, if that was a girl that he was with, everybody would have said, what a jerk. But since it was another guy, then, well, yeah, sure, he should protect himself.
More ways than one.
Well, and the people, you know, who are pushing for, and I'm for gay rights. Everyone should have equal rights. If you want to do whatever you want to do in the privacy of your own home, your own relationship, have fun. Your business is not my business. You're not hurting anyone. Two consenting adults, do whatever you want. If you want the same burden that married people have when that thing is over with, good luck to you, brother. Because I've been there and it ain't no fun. So rather than people fighting for the government being out of our business when it comes to our personal lives, because if you're trying to get out of a marriage, it's the law and the state makes it difficult. And to have someone in a black robe tell you when you can see your own children, and how many times a week or month you can see your own children, and how much of your income some other person is telling you you must provide for your own children. Why isn't the general population more concerned with getting the government out of all of our personal lives, rather than screaming and yelling and fighting to have the government more involved in another subset group of individuals? Makes absolutely no sense to me. And most gay people I talk to say, yeah, I wouldn't take that deal. I do a domestic partnership, you can dissolve it in 60 or 90 days with whatever you came in with, and you're done. And if you make good decisions with people you spend your time with or commit your life to, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. People make mistakes and you may end up with a jerk, but that's not my problem and it's not the state's problem. But this we saw fit throughout the years to have the state become more and more involved in our personal life. So I find it funny that, you know, that becomes an issue, a campaign issue in a big race. Well, what do you think about gay marriage? Well, I think it would be just as dumb as the marriage laws we have now. But we look at it differently. And by the way, I'm divorced 14 years. I'm not someone who got burned in a divorce. She and I sat down and said, listen, this is what, you know, we can do, you can do, I can do. I'm going to see the kids every day, you're going to see the kids every day, and that's it. And we worked it out. Now, some disagreements aren't that, you know, smooth and that easy, but we worked it out. That's our personal business. And the reason I bring up the story of that is that we have become more and more accustomed to the government being involved in our personal lives. And for security, well, what if the man were to leave and not take care of the children? That would be bad. Hopefully family, friends, you know, the people involved in the situation become stronger and recover from that. But we want the security of the government involved in our lives, involved in our business. And Ben Franklin, I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but you all are familiar with Ben Franklin's quote of someone who would give up a little bit of security for a little bit of safety deserves neither safety nor security. And the key word is deserves. And people don't realize if you beg the government for this protection, this security, this safety, you do not deserve the liberty you've given up, and you do not deserve the security that you're looking for if you expect the government to give it to you. So it was 2010, early November, I got an email from a guy named Larry Aiken, who's about my age, lived about the next town over really from where I live. And I read the story. Somebody passed it along to me and said, listen, this guy's desperate and he wants you to read his email about his son being in jail. You know, people send emails with problems, and if I can shed light on it and try to help, I certainly want to. I read this and I was absolutely dumbfounded that this would happen. I wrote it back and I said, listen, I want to look you in the eye and sit down with you and have a conversation. I talked to him on the phone. I said, what you're saying, if it's true, it's unbelievable. It can't happen in our country, and even in this state, which is probably the worst for freedoms and liberties and rights, especially when it comes to guns. So we sat at a diner, and I was just blown away. I said, listen, I'll commit to helping you and putting this out on the air, but you got to tell me for sure there's nothing I'm missing here. There's nothing you're not telling me in this story. There's no hidden agenda. There were a couple people at the radio station said, it doesn't sound right, it doesn't smell right, I don't know. So I sat with him for about an hour and we talked, and I said, I'm going to help you. And we went on the air and pleaded with people to call the governor's office, to read over this. He had a website where people, friends and family, had put together a Facebook page and gave all the details. And the details, if you're not familiar, are pretty simple. He had moved from Colorado to New Jersey because he and his wife at the time had split up. And he transported the guns back legally to the state. He was at his parents' house and in a process of moving in with a friend. Well, in that process, it wasn't a straight shot from house A to house B. And one night he was despondent and was on the phone with his mother, and his mother made a fatal mistake in that he said that, you know, I can't not go without seeing my children. And she's going to drag me through this mess, and I can't go through this. I'm afraid of what I might do with myself. So she went ahead and called the police. The police showed up, called him on his cell phone, and said, you know, we're here, your parents are concerned. Which a lot of us would do. If we heard our son say that on the phone, maybe we would do the same thing. I think the husband was more of the mind like, you know, he'll come home or let me talk him down from the ledge, but the mother pushed the panic button and called the police. So they called him on his cell phone and got him to come home. Got him to come home, they asked him if he had any weapons, and he said, yeah, I'm in the process of moving. He also had his blender in there, and he had his toothbrush in there, and his dishes and everything else. He was legitimately packed to move. And in the trunk, he said, yeah, I have firearms. And he had bought 2 handguns. He was not a gun enthusiast, but there was a grisly murder near the town where he was living with his young wife and young baby in Colorado, so he saw fit to buy handguns and ammunition. So he showed the police officer, and the officer said, listen, being the nature of this call and the state of mind you might be in, we're going to take these weapons and put them in your father's house for safekeeping and, you know, send you on your way. So they came inside and asked Larry if he had room in the house, and he said, well, I really don't have room for the weapons. And the police officer said, well, we'll store them down at the police station until you can figure out what to do with them. And an hour went by, and the police cars were still out in front of his house with some additional cars there. He came out to find out what was going on. Brian was in handcuffs. The cop who had talked to him earlier said, listen, this technicality, we'll iron this all out in the morning, we'll spend an overnight, you know, in the town, in the jail, and come and get him tomorrow. Well, the next day he'd been transferred to county, and off he went. And that was a year or two prior to me getting involved. So by the time I got involved, he was almost 2 years in prison, serving a 7-year sentence. The prosecutor, the judge, the police officials involved that night in the arrest all made major mistakes, and all maybe were too hungry for advancement or God knows what, a name for themselves. But the thing that really ticked off the prosecutor was that the Aikens had gone to Judge Napolitano of Fox News when the case first came up. Judge didn't like that, prosecutor didn't like that, and off to the races they went, to putting this guy in jail for 7 years. Like I said, when I heard the story, I have sons that age, and I think of, you know, the kind of country they're growing up in, and I hopefully still have a little bit of life left in me that I'm going to be around a while, and don't want to live in a country where if you follow the law, you can still get put in prison for 7 years, having a clean record, not doing anything, not making any attempt to commit any crime with your weapons, and still be put away for 7 years. Not the kind of country I think any of us want to live in. So with some pressure from various forces, from the Second Amendment Society, from the governor's office, from some media attention, was just before Christmas of 2010 that Brian was let out of jail. And I get emails from him twice a year thanking me for, you know, whatever I was able to do and call attention to it, and from his dad as well. Good people, average people, regular working people, and like I said, that moment, that whole scenario just shook me up so much that you couldn't help but get involved and couldn't help feel that something is desperately wrong with our system and with the direction we're going. Like I said, I'm not someone who got burned in a divorce case, so it's not why I talk about how horrible some of the divorce laws and family and court laws are. And I'm not someone who owns a weapon, but I grew up hunting with my dad, my uncles, and as an adult I've hunted a few times with friends, and I know responsible gun owners. And I tell you, the irresponsible gun owners, the people who buy them illegal and use them to commit crimes, aren't having meetings at the American Legion. And there's absolutely no reason why legal, well-intentioned citizens should be able to secure firearms in the way that it's been set up, and this state is more strict than most. And it's important that you all are here tonight to hear what's going on with these laws, and also to hear how overreaching our government has gotten. And this hasn't happened in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 2 administrations. This has incrementally crept up on us since the end of World War II. And we got comfortable, and we got secure and fat and happy, and we've drifted off the path, way off the path. You know, when you're on the highway, you drift a little bit because you're not paying attention, looking down at your phone, you hit that rumble strip. Well, we on the second tire of that rumble strip. And the noise should be deafening to most freedom-loving citizens of this country. And it's not one politician or one party, but it's the mindset of a lot of people who have become comfortable with giving away our liberties and our rights just for that sake of security. And it's wrong, and it takes courage to stand up and say, no, I don't want those laws. I see where they're against the Constitution. The Constitution also wasn't made up in a month or a week or even over the course of a year. Well-intentioned, well-thought-out, well-educated, well-traveled, well-studied men of honor put that together for a reason. They saw the mistakes over the history of mankind with governments, and they picked and formed what's not a perfect system, but damn near perfect for the rest of the world to see and to want to come to. And I think we are really letting that go. And to get involved in a society like this, come to meetings like this, hear people speak, get involved, know the politicians who are moving in the direction of taking more and more of your rights away, is important. And it's important to go even to local elections and hear local politicians, get involved, go to town council meetings. Speak, let your voice be heard. Someone may feel the same as you, but because they don't hear anybody else get up there and say it, they figure, well, I just might be alone in my thoughts and just my family or my friends feel this way. We all have to stand up and let our voices be heard, that we've got to turn this thing around and speak up when we see something going wrong. So I want to thank you for inviting me tonight. And if there are any questions before I turn it back over to the people who really know what they're talking about. Okay.
Are you still in New Jersey?
Am I still in New Jersey?
No, I can see that you are. Is Brian Aiken still in Jersey?
Brian moved out of New Jersey. He was...
Good man.
About 3 months ago, I got pictures of him proposing to his girlfriend, and they're out west somewhere, and there was a whole series, he
That's great.
made a special proposal, or a helicopter came down, picked them up, took them to a park, he got on his knee, I got the whole roll of 135 pictures of it. So yeah, the first thing he wanted to do when he got released was get out of Dodge. Yes?
Yeah, even though it was overturned, it was pardoned. This seems like it would be the quintessential case of a civil rights violation, just like it would be if the state decided to not allow blacks to vote. Has that gone up the chain to basically overturn New Jersey's laws as a violation of the Second Amendment from the federal level all the way to the Supreme Court?
The climate is such that, like you said, you mentioned if it was a certain group and the rights were violated, people have more of a sensitivity to certain minority groups having their rights violated. Gun owners aren't seen as a troubled group or a group that's been put upon. They are now. But people don't view it that way. The media language and the media presentation of these ideas and these cases means a whole lot. And it's not going to benefit a politician. It certainly wouldn't benefit any politician to come to the aid of a member of a minority group, whether it be religious or racial or ethnic, to say, hey, I'm standing up for this guy or this woman's rights, or a female who's been wronged in a certain way. But for that person to go out of the way and say, in a state like New Jersey, that I'm defending the rights of a gun owner and they violated civil rights, it might get some traction with people like us, but it wouldn't get the media attention and the traction in the legislature that it would with some of those other groups. And that's unfortunate. That's the best answer I can give.
But I'm saying going beyond Jersey, take it to the
federal level. To the federal level. Again, you've got an attorney general and an administration. I think it isn't a real strong pro-Second Amendment group and lobby, so I don't think their office is going to be too sympathetic to it. I would think in a different environment, different administration, it should, and perhaps in the future it would. I don't know what the statute of limitations on that is. I think Brian just wants to get on with his life at this point.
So he chose not to pursue it at a federal level, beyond the states?
At this point, no. And I think he was so happy. He saw that he kicked up a little dust when he first got brought into court, and the trouble that I caused him, that I think he's enjoying the free air a little bit too much at this point to kick up any more dust. And like I said, in the future, if the climate seems a little more friendly for that kind of a complaint to be heard, he might. Yes, sir?
What are your thoughts on the UN arms treaty that's coming up at the end of the month?
I plead ignorance. I have to plead ignorance. Is there something you'd like to share with the group that...
Well, he mentioned it earlier about on the 27th, Hillary Clinton is supposed to sign an arms treaty on that, kind of gives like the UN and the world kind of like a small arms treaty that will, kind of a backdoor into the Second Amendment.
I had heard Dick Morris talk about that the other day, and someone sent me a notice on that. I don't know if it was you, Frank, or someone else sent me a text saying you got to check out his website and see. So I hadn't read it, I hadn't looked into it, but again, that's a frightening thought. And again, people know the meaning of the word sovereign nation, and that's the definition right there. But that movement's been promoted for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. We've heard people talk about that. New World Order and that sort of thing. Yes?
This bill is going to be signed on the 27th by Hillary Clinton, I believe. It's against the Constitution of our Congress. Our Congress has to reject it. I hope our Congress does, or we're in big trouble.
Well, the Congress has become almost impotent in the most recent years with executive orders and things like this being signed in this proposed treaty on the 27th. So if the treaty is signed, does Congress have to sign off on it to make it law? They have to ratify it. Is there an effort in this state or in other states to pressure their congressmen to... There's something, again, that flies under the radar because the media, in general, is not shining too much light on it. You get people like Dick Morris or Judge Napolitano, or people on Fox News, which is the only network that I know of would really shine light on it. And I imagine I'm in a room where I can say, I watch Fox News without getting the boot.
You're okay.
Don't say MSNBC.
Well, I tell you a quick story. I have a cousin from southern Italy. He's a very bright guy. He's 28 years old, speaks 5 languages, well educated in Europe, got a job with the EU in Geneva, and then applied for a job with the World Bank. The World Bank is sort of under the auspices of the United Nations, but really its biggest contributor to its fund, to its monies, is the United States. So he had moved to Washington, D.C. to work for World Bank. And he's from a social democratic country, and he wants to help the world, to save the world, and he is a bureaucrat, so he's got that mindset. We talk about politics a little, and he's polite enough not to talk about American politics because he said, really, I don't know much about it. And I would be speaking out of turn because I'm not a citizen. I live here now and I work here, but I don't really know. And I try to explain my point of view, a libertarian point of view, and why the American Constitution works and why it established the best nation in the history of the world. And I think you would agree with that. But the little nuances he's not so familiar with, so he's polite enough not to comment. But he'd heard about the Tea Party, and I said, what do you know about the Tea Party? He said, well, I've heard that they're racist and they're xenophobic. I said, do you have any evidence of that? Or that's just what I heard. And I said, well, do you know what the Tea Party is? And I explained the Boston Tea Party, and I explained that it happened at a time when we had the first African-American president, but it wasn't because we had the first black president, but the way the information came to him was all these crotchety old white people got up and got mad because we elected a black president. I said, it couldn't be further from the truth. I said, you've got to be kidding me. I said, I don't go to meetings and I don't participate, but I believe in exactly what they believe in. Limited government, less intrusion into you, more liberty, more freedom. And he started to understand. And I knew that he understood a little bit better about American politics and media when about 3 weeks ago we were talking. He said, I watched MSNBC, and it was blatant how one-sided their coverage was. I was like, thank God. His socialist, upbringing didn't totally cloud his vision. I think he said he's a bright kid. Are there any other questions I can answer? Well, again, I want to thank Frank for inviting me. Thank you for having me.
I do have one question I want you to say.
Sure.
What was the actual charge, Brian, detective captain?
Well, Frank would have more information on exactly what it was, but the only detail of that I know is that a new law had been in place for about 24 hours. 24 hours. It was like January 2nd of 2009, I believe, or 8, when he was arrested. And that's why the cop initially said, here, put the guns in the house, we're just going to get him out of his possession, or we'll keep him at the station. And then when the captain, I guess, or the shift commander had heard what was going on, he said, no, there's a new, and I guess he had gotten a directive from the county prosecutor, if you have any gun violations, let me know, and see if it's covered by this new statute, which had only been in place for about 24 hours. It started January 1 of that year. And Frank, do you have
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, it's very similar to what I was talking about before with this bill that Linda Stender was putting out. Okay, I don't know if you were here for that, but Assemblywoman Linda Stender put out a piece of legislation, and this is exactly the same situation. She wants to raise the penalty from a third-degree felony, where there's discretion, to a second-degree felony for possession of a firearm on school grounds. Unlawful possession of a firearm, or criminal possession of a firearm on school grounds is already a second-degree felony. Okay, so there's no reason for this. What this bill would do is the same thing that happened to Brian Aiken. It used to be that the mere possession of transportation of your firearms without obvious criminal intent or criminal activity was a third-degree offense. Paul Ladow had just, as Dennis mentioned, had just raised that from, because of legislation, had raised that from a third-degree to a second-degree felony. So again, the Graves Act engaged, and then there's a mandatory prison sentence. So that's what happened to Brian Aiken. Now, this bill with Linda Stender is going to do exactly the same thing. I did send you information on that. And because here, you pull over, you get a flat tire, and you pull over, and you happen to be on school property, to change your tire. You just came back from hunting or the range or whatever. You have a firearm on school property. That's it. Doesn't matter that you're not doing anything.
And in this particular case, they didn't buy the story that he was in the process of moving or on the way up to his buddy's house. They thought he might have had other things in mind and couldn't prove it. Even getting the guns out of his hands and saying, all right, even though we see your toaster and your lamp in there and your toothbrush, we can get you on this technicality, and they went ahead and interrupted. Again, thank you all very much. Oh yeah, one more. I must like applause.
So you know more about it?
So, say that again?
The UN treaty thing you brought up? I'm sure you're familiar with George Soros.
Yes.
Look up the company or organization that he founded, IANSA. It's like Peter but bigger.
Right.
And he sends his people to the UN treaty every 2 years to attempt to disarm our country.
And
They have a pistol in front of the building with a barrel pistol that they like a president.
and Hillary Clinton is due to sign this on the 27th.
And senators have gotten together, of course, 2 years ago, because it takes two-thirds of the Senate to ratify. And even on the Democratic side, conservatives, like out in Arkansas, said they wouldn't do it.
And hopefully it'll stop there. And hopefully, I can bring it up on the air and get some local attention to it. Hopefully, it gets some attention nationwide. And this is a state where gun rights are sort of, a very background issue and only important to a handful of people. But in other states, I can imagine they'd be freaking out over this.
Look up George Soros and Anderson, you'll see the connection.
Yeah, I'm familiar with George Soros. Yes, sir.
Two of the countries that are on the committee forming this treaty are Iran and Azerbaijan, which are not known for freedom.
Two of our friends.
Yeah.
It's an unusual hunting hat you have, sir. I love the diversity in the group, and I love some of the T-shirts. Are you the one who couldn't ask me a question? You the guy that has the "you got to kill it before you grill it" T-shirt? Thank you again for having me.
Okay, so what I'd like to do real quickly is I would like to introduce Alexander Ruby, and he's going to tell you a little bit about an initiative that we have going on. You're going to see, we're going to be asking for your help because we need people to do things like write letters, we need people to do things like help us with contacts with the media and so forth, and Alexander's going to head that up, and I'd like to introduce you right now, Alexander Ruby.
If you asked me about a year and a half ago if I was ever a firearms person, I would have said no. I used to go out with my friends, they'd go hunting or shooting. It was a fun activity, I never saw the practical use of it. And now why I'm going to explain how I got into this firearms movement is that on May 25th of 2011, I was walking home from work, I had a late night, got around 10:30, circled the corner, and just as I turned around the corner, I had a large bang. Being very ignorant, because in crime around my area, well, my apartment, 5 10 minutes later, the man I missed it by 2 minutes was shot in the head by 3 criminals, an 18-year-old and two 17-year-olds. At that point, I started asking myself, how would I have protected myself if I were in that dilemma? I started doing the research. I actually found out that the law do nothing to protect the criminals in New Jersey, opposed to my friends who live in North Carolina and other free states, they protect the citizens. At that point in my life, I realized I had one major dilemma. How do I protect my personal safety in the event I was ever to be confronted by a criminal? I knew by getting the firearm legally, I'd be able to protect myself in a home. Fast forward a few months again, going through the process, and kind of being introduced to Frank and becoming part of the movement, I realized I have two dilemmas in my life. How do I protect myself if I were to ever be confronted by a criminal? And now how do I protect myself if I ever get confronted by the police? Because as I started reading more of these case laws, I realized that the police do not differentiate between criminal intent and the law-abiding citizen who's now becoming a law-abiding criminal, thanks to the New Jersey criminal system, that this person had no criminal intent. Now I live in a multi-family home, sometimes I can't find parking, so I have to walk a block and a half. carrying a Remington 700 sniper rifle on my back, a block and a half, is not a really smart decision, nor is it easy to conceal. So these are the dilemmas that I have to worry about on a day-to-day basis, being a firearms owner. Obviously, if a police officer sees me walking down the street with a big rifle case on my back and a couple hundred rounds of ammo, they're not going to be very polite to me. Nor is it going to be cheap for me to defend myself and go along. Now, why is this important? I'm about 30 years old, I've never thought about my personal safety before, until the activity that happened on the 25th. As I started getting more involved with Frank, I started getting more like cases that were going on in New Jersey. Now I started becoming more engaged in active firearms work. I felt it was my duty. I've got my training, became an instructor, started teaching more people about the Second Amendment right and defending themselves, especially the women that I loved working with. I got all my female friends who started going with me to the range. And it was amazing the stigma that was associated with it. As I started being more open about As I started being more open about our constitutional rights, more people started pitting me as being some gun freak. And I started explaining myself to the situations that could arise on a day-to-day basis. And that really reconfirmed how much of a negative stigma we have in society today, especially in New Jersey. We have so many closet gun owners, and it's despicable. Could you imagine if this was the case with the First Amendment right, freedom of speech? People were going crazy. I told Frank a funny story. I was updating my social profile about a week ago, and I put a picture of myself competing in an IDPA competition and stating what I was actively involved in. Within an hour, I received a message from the webmaster that they removed my photo of me competing or me participating in this activity, citing their guidelines that no violent or illegal activities can be displayed in my profile pictures. And this is how we get into the media section. I immediately wrote back. It wasn't complicated. I didn't have to hire an attorney. I'm not overly educated on media communication. And in 2 sentences, I said, "Dear webmaster, please explain to me how me participating in a legal activity, which is an Olympic sport, as you'll find out in the next month, is considered violent or illegal." And then within 2 hours, the photo was put back up, and I never heard back. And this is the type of message we have to start bringing out. I'm sick and tired, we're all sick and tired, of every time we read any type of violent act with a firearm, that all these anti-gunners are attacking people. We have to ban guns, we have to do this, we have to do that. I recently called Cory Booker, the Newark mayor, on the radio, asking if he would participate in a firearm safety class that I'd love to host in Newark. Of course, he said sure, he always wanted to go to the range and whatnot. So I said, great, this is fantastic. And he went to cite saying they'd only had one criminal activity by a gun owner that was legally owned, and that was to commit suicide. How is that a crime? That now he's using these statistics. And if you read the Brady campaign statistics, it's the same thing. They say that 30,000 people every year die because of gun violence. But they don't differentiate what the crimes are. So what we are doing today with the Second Amendment Society is we created a task force, which is a lovely government term everybody will use when they want to feel like they're doing something important. And we're creating a team of writers. We have about 10 fantastic writers now. We're compiling a list of all the media outlets. We have about 45 media outlets that we are getting letters to the editor, opinion section, and the newsroom. And anybody can send in a letter. Every time there's anything related with crime, we have to make the story different. That it is not the law-abiding citizen that we have to be concerned about. By disarming the population, you're not going to remove the firearms, knives, weapons, whatever it may be, any type of weapon from the criminals. All you're doing is protecting the criminal, and you're not protecting the law-abiding citizen. So that's why we have to really work together. We're creating a great team of writers. We have the resources put together so that every week, every month, whatever it may be, 1 or 2 letters, whatever anybody can do, we have to send letters in, changing the perception of firearms ownership in New Jersey. And through that, we're engaging the population. We can start changing people's mindset, as I do all the time with all my students I'm teaching in firearm safety, they ask me, well, why is this important? I said, well, listen, if somebody came into your house tonight and they were, going to rape you or assault you, beat you up, whatever it may be, you have two options. You can either try to scramble for your phone because nobody has landlines anymore, try to, in your state of shock, take your password off, which would never happen, and then wait for the person to not attack you. If you read this book, it's called Call 911 When You Die. You'll find about all the fantastic cases that have happened where the police have not arrived, they thought that the people that were calling were joking, so they never even dispatched anybody. And then even in cases where somebody was murdered or killed or assaulted, and the victim's families sued the police department for not arriving in time, it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court stated that the police department do not have the legal obligation to be your personal bodyguards. So this is why we have to start relaying these messages, changing the tone in New Jersey about what legal firearm ownership means. We all hope that we're never going to have to use it in a situation like that. That's what we have to explain. So with your help, we ask that everybody get involved. You can send an email to legislation@nj2as.com and start submitting your contact information so that once we finish compiling our list of all the media outlets, we can start sending out letters to the editor, putting in sections of the opinion section in the newsroom, and start having our voices heard. And by doing that, that's going to start getting the message across to the politicians who are making these laws. We have to stop protecting the criminals, and we have to start protecting law-abiding citizens in New Jersey. Thank you.
So hopefully, when you leave here tonight, you're going to understand how active this group is and what we have, some of what we have in store for the future. There's certainly a lot more that we are going to be doing. There's a lot more that has to be done. We will not be satisfied until the right to keep and bear arms in New Jersey is no longer infringed. And basically, every turn right now it is infringed. So we'll do whatever we can to relieve some of the pain. In the meantime, do not be mistaken, though, because I did get a couple of comments on our Facebook. By the way, we have a very active Facebook group, so I do encourage you. Obviously, I would love for you all to join, people that haven't joined. But if you want some time to think about it, or if you want to get involved, jump onto our Facebook group, nj2as.com, and start participating. You're going to get a lot of information. You're going to meet a lot of great people, and you'll see what we're all about. And I think that will be very informative for you. But the point that I want to make, I think that you're going to be encouraged by what you're going to see. Now, I mentioned it before, and it bears repeating. We need as many members as possible to make this happen. So please, if you like what you saw, tell your friends, tell your shooting buddies, tell your buddies, your neighbors, your family about the NJ2AS. Let's get the word out there. I'm going to have brochures available. There's some in the back. Feel free to grab some, bring home to a family member. Also, if you know people, by the way, because voting is really the way we're going to make the most significant changes. If you know someone who you can convince to register to vote, grab a couple of those voter registration forms back there on your way out. Now, is any questions that you have about the NJ2AS or anything that I can answer for you? Yes?
In regard to the legislation and communications going to the government, a lot of states have what's called the castle doctrine,
Right.
which is basically protecting yourself at home and self-defense. Any legislation that's in the works now for having New Jersey adopt something like
There
that?
actually is. I just saw something. It's not, the home defense law. Was that the O'Toole? Kevin O'Toole? Yeah. Senator O'Toole introduced something. Actually introduced it a while ago. I think it was in January. But it's starting to get someplace. So if and when we have an opportunity to support that, we'll take a much closer look at it. There hasn't been really much movement because, as you probably know, any pro-firearms owner legislation doesn't go very far in this state. So we have to really build, the way that we're going to change that is by what I just said. Get your friends and neighbors to vote. Everybody, there's a lot of people who have given up. They've thrown up their hands and they said, it's never going to change in New Jersey. And what's the point? You've got to change these people's minds. Yes?
Quick question about Governor Christie.
Governor Christie has not been a friend of the gun owner. He's given us no indication whatsoever that he would support the right to keep and bear arms. His statement is, I fully support the Second Amendment of the United States. As I said before, every politician says that because you have to. You put your hand on the Bible or you put your hand in the air and you swear or affirm to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and the Second Amendment is part of it. Unfortunately, they don't really mean what they're saying. Okay, so what we've seen, you judge a person not by what they say, but their actions. He put a person in charge as Attorney General of New Jersey, Jeff Chiesa, who just came out with a statement that basically says, the right to keep and bear arms does not exist beyond your home. So with that kind of an attitude, now this is a Christie appointee, with that kind of attitude, that pretty much tells me we can't expect very much from him.
Ask him if he feels the same way about the right to speech.
Yeah, of course, of course. That's actually the point. But see, it's not them. Okay, remember something that Dennis just said before about what they deserve. Okay, what they deserve neither. Well, there's also a statement that says people get the kind of government they deserve. Now, that doesn't mean you and I necessarily, because we're the ones that are out there, trying to make the changes. But there are an awful lot of people, and these are the people that I'm talking about. If you can get to them, and they're not unreachable. These are your friends. These are the people who always say, nah, I never vote. Talk to them. Change their mind. Let them know that by doing that, they're just contributing to the problem. They'll never solve it. They'll never change anything. And New Jersey will get worse and worse. The country will get worse and worse. So anything and I'm not telling you who to tell them to vote for. That's something they have to decide for themselves. But I'd rather see them vote, even if some of them are going to vote for the quote-unquote who I might think is the wrong person. I still would prefer to see these people get involved in the system and use the system the way that it was intended to be used. So keep that in mind. Talk up to NJ2AS, get on the forums if you belong to any forums or ranges or clubs or whatever. And if you like what you saw tonight, if you think we're on the right track and you agree with our approach, let us know. If you want to get involved, let us know. There's so many things that we need to do that we haven't been able to do because we lack the resources. Yes?
Frank, is there any progress with the legislation that might be spoken of eliminating the pistol permits?
Yes. Oh, man, I can't believe I forgot to talk about that. Oh, I have some very good news. Well, I did post it on Facebook, by the way. That's why I mentioned join our Facebook group, because that's where you're going to get the information right as it happens, okay? As I know it, I post it. We just heard from, I was speaking to Frank Virgilio, who is the president of the New Jersey State Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs, and he had been speaking with Steve Sweeney, who wants us, us being the 2A community, to work with him to introduce legislation that can't repeal one gun a month at this point. They don't have the backing to repeal it. However, they found out a good end run. Instead of having to get, if you wanted to purchase 12 guns, one gun a month in a year, having to go and get 12 pistol purchase permits, one after the other, if this legislation is passed, you get one pistol purchase permit, good for a year. You can buy 12 guns on that one pistol purchase permit. You don't have to go back. You don't have to go through the process for each firearm. You just go to the store, they do a NICS check, you walk out with your gun. Okay? So, that is correct. That is correct. You get one. So you'll still get that one initial pistol purchase permit and you'll go through the same process, right? It's good for 1 year. So that's 12 firearms, or I guess handguns in this case. We'll talk about pistol purchase permits. So that's 12 handguns per year. Now the only thing I'm not sure, and because the legislation hasn't been finalized or even completely written yet. I don't know whether you could like go and get all 12 guns at one time. You might. My understanding is that you could.
What happens if, in the case of life inheritance or a collector,
Something along those lines.
get 50 guns at once?
Well, that you have to get the exemption for, and the exemptions do still exist.
So you would then need, say just for round numbers, if you were going to do 36 guns in a year, because you bought 312 for collections 12, you would then need to go then just 3 times a year.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they're going to handle the exemptions. They may handle it just exactly the way that they are now, but I'll find that information out for you, and I'll make sure that I post it on Facebook and maybe get. I try to send out president's letters. Oh, by the way, even again, I'm going to keep making this plea. I do please invite you to join. It's $35, and it's the best $35 you'll ever spend. It's less than the price of 2 boxes of ammo or backpacks, as somebody said. Backpacking, yes, that's our new slogan. But if for some reason you can, I understand. Right now, the economy's horrible, and there's some people that. So if you're in that situation, at least sign up for our email alerts. Okay, get to our website. That's free. Just sign up for our email alerts. Sign up for our Facebook website, so that you will be kept informed of what's going on. Okay, it's the best information of what's happening on a pretty immediate basis that you're going to find. I mean, other groups do put out letters, and they go out, somewhat infrequently. When something cracks, I will send out a president's letter of alert, tell you about the events we're having, tell you about the legislation that we're looking at, and all these other things that we've been mentioning tonight. So keep an eye on those things, and if you can, if it's something you're interested in, or you have a talent, especially if you have a talent, you're an IT guy, or you're a web designer, or you have contacts with suppliers for merchandise. We buy T-shirts, we buy different things. Anything like that, let us know. I have different emails set up on the website: merchandise at nj2as.com, membership at nj2as.com, legislation at nj2as.com, etc., etc., etc. If you don't find one, then just send it to president at nj2as.com, and I will, I'll send you to the right person. So if you are interested and you can
Just
help.
like to make a suggestion.
Sure.
There's a bunch of Tea Party groups here.
Yes.
I'm Robert from the East Jersey Tea Party. Please join our pages, so if you have a posting, make sure it goes on our pages also.
As a matter of fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Dan O'Neill, who you may or may not know, is very involved in the Liberty groups and the Tea Party, and he's been promoting us quite a bit, and I noticed that I saw a lot of postings about this event on the different, so I will get more involved, probably not personally. I'm going to have to assign somebody to it, because I'm already...
Just takes a copy, paste, click, and like this presentation will be on YouTube by tomorrow morning.
Oh, phenomenal. That's great. Okay, good. I'm glad. So yes, so we'll try to do as much as we can to make sure that our name is out there, and if you guys can help spread it, that would be wonderful. Any other questions that I can answer? Sure.
Yeah, one question. I'd like to know if you'll ever see New Jersey the right to carry, because you can own a gun in New Jersey, but when you go out, you take it with you.
Right. Well, obviously,
you can't carry.
yeah, obviously that is the golden, that's the holy grail. That's what we're looking for. We want the right. No, we have. See,
we have the right to carry.
We have the right to keep and bear arms in New Jersey. We possess the right to keep and bear arms. It's just that if you exercise that right, the New Jersey police will throw you in jail. Okay, so there's a difference between not having the right and not being able to exercise the right. What we have to do is overcome those obstacles put in our path by the New Jersey legislature. It's not the police. The police are only carrying out the requirements of their job, but it's the New Jersey legislature who, has created all of these laws that infringe upon our right to keep and bear arms. So the answer to that question, yes. I do. I would not be standing up here. I'm 63 years old. I'm retired. I finally moved into my dream home on the bay in Manahawk, and I was just going to lay down and, expire. And then I got involved in this. Trust me, I wouldn't be spending this much time and effort. I mean, I'm on that computer, 16 hours a day, posting and answering emails and so forth and so on. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't believe in my heart that we were going to get it. Because that's the whole point of this. We are going to overcome those obstacles to our right to carry. Yes.
Freedom is not free. You have to fight for it.
You have to fight for it. And you have to fight hard.
Now, you're retired and you're pro-gun. Why didn't you move to the Carolinas?
Well, the answer to that question is a multiple choice answer. I have two beautiful granddaughters that live here in New Jersey, and I ain't going nowhere because they're my life. I love them. So I'm going to be here for a while. Hopefully. My doctor says if I don't lose about 60 pounds, I may not be here for that long, so we'll see. Is there anything else I can answer? Okay, yes? The Attorney General? Solomon, are you talking about?
Yes.
The jury's still out on that. I've asked a bunch of people to do some research for me on whether Solomon is, the word so far is no. Yeah, cut from the same cloth. Another, you know, he's friends with Donald Norcross, and I don't know what that means. But, so, but I don't want to say yay or nay because the jury's still out. I'd be talking out of one side of my head. I really want to thank everyone that came here tonight, members, non-members, the Tea Party people, the Liberty Group people. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the evening, and especially the presentation by Dennis Malloy, who is phenomenal.